Okay, hi, hello everybody, and this is the continuation of the essays in externalization of the hierarchy. And we're on page 229. Just as a kind of a segue, DK said something very uplifting here towards the end of the section at which we stopped, or during which we stopped. He said that the will of Shambhala may be enabled to express itself through love and through the mediation of the hierarchy, working through all disciples, aspirants, and men and women of goodwill, is the earnest prayer of your fellow disciple and co-worker. Well, we know that he stands with us, and we have to stand with him. And the whole thing about this last program we did is to answer the questions regarding the pairs of opposites, one of them leading down into matter and the other leading into the spirit, one of them on the left-hand path, one of them, the other, the opposite, on the right-hand path. Okay. It's a very practical book, as we can see, and applies to today. My only hope is that somehow, while waiting for what will be the wonderful presentation of the third installment of this series of bridging treatises, that we somehow manage to absorb and apply as much as possible the material that has been given from 1919 to 1949, the period when Alice Paley passed in December of 1949 until the present time is, well, just about 70 years. Okay, now the world crisis today, page 229. June 30th, 1940. You know, it was a year in which the Battle of Britain was taking place, but nothing that was happening in Europe could induce the United States to declare war and join the Allies. There were other ways that the U.S. helped, but not through active fighting. Only when, on December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was bombed by the Japanese, that actually there was a choice. And the United States entered the war, and at the same period of time declared war on Germany. Now, we really do see an isolationist tendency here. Europe is involved in World War I until 1917, and only then did the U.S. send its troops from 1917 to 1918, at which time the armistice was concluded, November 11th, Scorpio, 1918. And here we are again, although Roosevelt well knew that it was right and proper in terms of the future of freedom for humanity that the U.S. enter the war. It was not until 2 years after war was declared, and a bit more than that, that the U.S. actually entered the war as a fighting party. So, surrounded by ocean in a way, to the right and the left, Pacific and Atlantic, there is an isolationist tendency. Of course, the way travel is today and communications, that is being broken down. Okay, events and situations change with such rapidity at this time as humanity takes action or refrains from action, which latter course is just as determining for good or evil as is the former, that I feel again the need of writing on the world crisis as I did last autumn, thus carrying forward my theme. So whether we enter actively or stay out of the fray, each is determining for good or for evil. Probably the neutral countries at that time contributed to the advancement of evil simply by taking their energy away from the battle. I write as one who is working on the inner side today, sensing and seeing what is hidden from many of you. The exoteric outer history of events is known to all of you, and with its detail I need not deal. The action taken by the combatant nations or withheld by the neutral nations, and herein, is implied an act of selfishness, I believe, or withheld, as it is said by the neutral nations, is also registered in your consciousness. The implications of such activity can only be truly known and appreciated by those people who today think in terms of humanity as a whole and not in terms of a particular nation, such as the good of Germany or the destiny of America. So what he's asking for is global thinking, holistic thinking. Few disciples there are at this time who can thus think synthetically or who see the vision as a whole, precipitating as that which will condition eventually the entire human family. So, the question for all of us, even today, the entire human family, and are we thinking in terms of the entire human family or pretty much of our region or our continent or even simply our nation? Many there are who are awakening to the need so to do and who are finding in their processes of readjustment many bewildering problems. For these sincere but bewildered people, I write. I find that, and I suppose it's including the aspirants and disciples who are awakening to this greater vision and are sincerely bewildered. I find that there is little that I can say to the provincially minded or to those with the purely parochial point of view. Their limitations of vision lie within themselves, and only dire events and strenuous emergency will enable them finally to transcend the petty quibbling and quality of their lower mind with its concrete tendency to hark back to the past and its fear to venture with faith into the future. So, even the master is writing not for everybody, at least at this time. And there are those he simply cannot reach. And thus it is with us as well, as we think about those people upon whom our words and our reasoning and even our limited vision can have some positive effect. There are some who just are not ready to see, and others who, though ready, will not see. There are none so blind, it is said, as those who will not see. They've set their vision or their will against improved vision. I have been interested in the response to my earlier article, written in April 1940. Now, this is just a couple of months later, isn't it? The majority of those whom I sought to reach and with whom I have communicated for many years accepted my premises without much questioning, but refrained from positive action or the use of any influence. So it is, as he says, at times frustrating for workers on the inner side who notice how slowly, if at all, human beings on the outer side do respond. And he warns us, prepare your patience for that task, for one day you will be on the inner side and you will seek to influence those in the exoteric worlds, and the response may be frustrating. A few resented the implications of the existent divisions between the forces of light, focused through the Allied nations, and the forces of aggression, focused through Germany. They embody a true but erroneously interpreted idea of human unity. Well, when the patient is not well, the patient is not well, even though the patient will one day be well. So, in fact, we have to look at conditions as they are. Many things are out there today, 2019, all kinds of tendencies, and selfishness and a wider, more generous point of view are fighting it out in so many ways and in so many nations. They fail to understand that as the New Age is ushered in, there must inevitably come a judgment day, speaking symbolically, and the emergence of a clear line of demarcation between that which is new and that which is of the old age. Yes. And we have to be there for that judgment and see the line which exists, and not to pretend that it doesn't. There must appear the distinction between exoteric happenings and esoteric attitudes, and between those who see a new world order developed and brought to functioning activity by the forces of light, and through cooperation, coordination, understanding, and a world order which, how do we have here? Which will be brought, the forces of light, which will be brought through cooperation, coordination, understanding, and a world order which will be imposed by terror through dictatorial government, by the suppression of liberty, of conscience, and by the enthronement of a race whose values are at this time anti-spiritual and anti-social. Well, everywhere the choice was confronting people at that time. And is it not so now? Is it not so that a choice confronts us at this time? Maybe more subtly, perhaps, but nevertheless, it does so. And hopefully, in places of moment, the right choices, which are not selfish, are being made. Judgment Day is an interesting term, how it is used in theology and occultism, and here symbolically of choices made by humanity as they see with clarity the present division between the directions in which two groups, the contrasting direction in which two groups are heading. This judgment day is now upon humanity, and the final decision will be arrived at by those whose normal inclinations and natural tendencies are on the side of law and order, and whose will to good is directed towards right human relations and true human welfare. Okay. So he's asking people to choose rightly, to choose aright, as the consequences of various of the two choices become clearer to their understanding. These enlightened people will back their judgment with a focused will to bring in the era wherein these values will dominate: right human relations, true human welfare, law and order, and they are also willing to take the necessary measures to make these values possible. So, let's just put it like this. One thing to know and another to both know and act upon that knowledge. Excuse me. I would like to deal openly and frankly with the problems with which you are being confronted when you face the world as it is today, and the world as it may be tomorrow, a world whose fate is still unsettled. Is the world's fate settled now? Are we no longer facing the possible destruction of humanity and simply delay if people do not take up their proper responsibilities? Or is delay or is destruction also possible? I would present possibilities with a definite application to the reactions of such empires as those of Great Britain, France, and Holland. We do have to remember that the Dutch were great travelers too, and that they had a network of colonies as well, and with indication as to how the United States of America should be expected to respond. I write as one who represents the hierarchy, as a member of a certain standing in its ranks, and as one also who works day and night for the success of those nations in the human family who, with their backs to a wall of misunderstanding, vilification, and dislike, are strenuously opposing Germany and her satellite, Italy. So he still is not, revealing who he is, other than as a member of hierarchy, let us say, and signing himself as the Tibetan, but not as Master Jual Kul. It struck me as I'm looking here that he's working day and night for the success of those nations who are opposing Germany and her satellite, Italy. And it's the day and night part that really arrested my attention, because I was thinking of circumstances and conditions on the inner side of life, and how the usual cyclic fatigue may not, in fact, affect the work, the well-planned work, the organized work of such a one as Master DK and other masters, and how much we are, interrupted by the need for sleep and for rest. Perhaps on the inner side we do some work, but our efficiency as a steady and continuous worker is nothing near that which is the case for the master. I refer to that group of allies who today stand with their purpose focused in Great Britain, driven there by the trend of events. Well, Britain held out, and it had the first ray, France was occupied, and I think was it 1940 that occupation occurred? I'll just have to check when that occurred, but 40 or 41. Let's take a little look at that. Okay, a little bit of research revealed that the invasion there was in May of 1940, and within a month, the northern and western parts of France, it looks like Paris too, was occupied by Germany. So he's writing at that time when Hitler and his armies marched into Paris. Okay, so the hope of the Allies and those who were fighting for human freedom, and there's ever a tendency of certain forces within humanity itself to work against true freedom. This happened, let's just say these forces are focused in Britain at the time. It never was conquered. That itself was a huge event or non-event, the non-conquest of Britain by the Germans through British heroism and planning, and also through some serious mistakes made in the Luftwaffe, the German military air force. Anyway, those who are standing opposed to Germany and Italy. We're not talking about Japan at this time. I do this because the basic hope of human right relations, of true and lasting peace, of liberty of conscience, and of free and happy homes rests upon their triumphing. They are at this time the point of positive attack by the forces of evil. And we know what it was the Germans threw at Britain in the attempt to bring her to her knees, and it didn't work. And of course, I personally feel that the presence of a great disciple such as Churchill, whatever may have been his personal faults, was very much a strengthener of the resistance against what seemed like an almost inevitable invasion and occupation. It is not possible for us as yet to reach the soul of the German people within that unhappy land. So complete is the glamour under which they are laboring. Germany, we know, symbolically at least, maybe actually the member of the Axis which represented glamour, Japan, Maya, Italy, illusion, as he tells us. The day will come when again they will be reached, and this responsibility rests upon those Germans who remain free from glamour in other lands. You know, they were really driven out, and it was impossible for them to stay in their mother country and not be attacked or put into concentration camps or killed outright. It will come when the forces acting through the medium of a band of evil-intentioned men have been removed. And these are very heavy interior evil forces coming from the leaders in the East and the West, the leaders of the Black Lodge in the East and the West. So DK foresees the removal of Hitler and his evil gang, as he called it, showing the criminal element in this group. With their disappearance will come the dissipation of the clouds of evil propaganda. I think one of the things that's so interesting is how glamour can prevent the hierarchy from reaching humanity. And of course, think of ourselves, the individual disciple, and how our glamours can prevent our own soul from reaching through into our consciousness. And only the removal of glamour, and in this case, the removal of that band of evil intentioned men, you kind of wonder how they ever became as they became, could help with the removal, with the reaching by hierarchy of the German people. Of course, many good people came in afterwards, and the government was very much turned around, we might say. Perhaps it's a better part of the soul quality reaching through. You begin to think, you know, how the wonderful musicians came to Germany representing the fourth ray soul of that nation. They came in especially, I think, during the 19th century, before it began to seem that Bismarck's policy of blood and iron prevailed towards the end of the century. And DK seems to say that these artists came in prematurely at much sacrifice to themselves, maybe hoping to sway the tendency more towards the soul. But in fact, the warlike nature of the fourth ray was absorbed by the first ray personality, and Germany became an aggressor in the 20th century, certainly. And maybe we see some of those tendencies even earlier. Anyway, with their disappearance, this evil gang, and DK foresees it, you know, but the question is the timing, because so much of timing is rests with humanity. With their disappearance will come the dissipation of the clouds of evil propaganda. Now, I guess he's laying this at the door of Goebbels, who with Hitler, I think, was one of the main inlets for the force of the Black Lodge. He said Hitler and one other, and I've thought about it, and Goebbels just swayed millions with his big lie, as it is said. With their disappearance will come the dissipation of the clouds of evil propaganda, lying information, and distorted imputations and interpretations with which the mass of people, even in neutral lands, have been deluged. I'm always amazed when I look at the outer form of the so-called master race of Germans, pure Aryans, and how little the representatives in Hitler's evil gang, how little they resembled, Hitler himself included, this ideal Aryan Superman. It's almost it's shockingly comical, if it wasn't so terrible, the contrast between the appearance reflecting, I think, the inner nature and what the ideal may have been. Would you have me at this time of planetary crisis refrain from direct speech? Have me withhold from you who read my words the truth which is already apparent to those who ponder the signs of the times with an unprejudiced mind, unbiased thought, and a true love of humanity? So basically, he's preparing to say some pretty direct things, it appears, and he brings in the possibility of the assent of his reader, meaning the agreement of his reader. This last quality, a true love of humanity, constitutes a basic test of right or wrong action. And that's it. You know, we may have love for our near ones and those in our home and maybe in our municipality, maybe, or in our state or country or nation. But how far does it extend? There's a great insufficiency, I think, in general, in the average person's love of humanity, and even disciples themselves must ask this question of themselves about the love of humanity. This, well, as Carl Rogers, the psychologist, said, you know, this unconditional, positive regard. I think it's a great phrase, and it tells us that how we look upon people, their essence especially, is unconditionally positive, even though one must condemn the sin, though not the sinner. It is phenomenally clarifying if applied at this time to the combatants. Well, you know, Germany represented a great deal of hatred. Italy, in imitation, tried to take this on, and even now, strangely, when it comes to compassion shown to migrants and would-be immigrants who had great risk to their lives, try to cross the Mediterranean Sea and other water bodies there in completely unsafe boats. It's well, you're just taking your life in your hands when you get into such a boat, and then you are rejected in the country toward which you are traveling. And in this case, Spain has taken up some of the slack and has acted in a more humanitarian way because the right wing, again, is coming into power because of fear and selfishness, really. And, there's so much of the refusal to share that lies at the basis of the wholesale rejection of the immigrants. And of course, the immigrants are carrying with them conditioning, which is also unfortunate. Many of them are, and which makes them, by inverting some kind of inferiority complex, see themselves as the best of all people. So these attitudes are just have to be transformed entirely. Would you have me present the attitude of the hierarchy as that of a placid band of onlookers ready to help the world when the conflict is over, but at present insulated from all action and simply waiting till the dust and clamor of battle settle to stimulate in men's minds the vision of a new world order wherein everyone will have a good time, where there will be no unemployment, wherein fear and terror will find no place, and everyone will be happy, well-fed, well-fed and reasonably intelligent. I think you can see that he just is using mild sarcasm here. I think definitely. Yes, no self-respecting person could answer in the affirmative. Yes, Master DK, we want you to go easy with us as regards the truth, so we don't have to think clearly and see these unpleasant unfoldments, and so we can have an illusion about what the hierarchy is. So the answer has to be no. We would not have you deal with pleasant platitudes about a future happy world. As a matter of fact, we're told even regarding the, what can I call it, the future of the first part of the Aquarian Age, that it will be a time of difficulty, and this is running counter to so many people's hopes and expectations, counter to it. Would you have me picture to you a great band of disciples, initiates, and aspirants as a band of pacifists, cherishing the form side of life, afraid of death, and remaining passive in the face of the death struggle of human liberty, of life, conscience, and mind? Because obviously there are some, even though maybe they wouldn't admit it, that would have him do exactly that, so they could feel within themselves more comfortable, pacifists. And then he gives some of the reasons for pacifism, reasons which prevent us from entering the fray, no matter what that fray may be at our particular time of service. And those reasons are cherishing the form side, the fear of death, and passive in the face of the death struggle of human liberty, of life, conscience, and mind. We can only imagine back in Atlantean days what it was like when the lords of the dark face began to be transferred from the moon chain and take up their position on the earth chain, earth globe, on the basis of their initiate status and superior intelligence. All of these things were threatened, and in many places they were denied, with a far less intelligent group of human beings at the time, as we are told. So, human liberty was stamped out in places. The life force was denied. Conscience was inoperative. Mind was made to serve outrageously intense artificial desire. All of this back in the old days during which many of us necessarily participated. And DK says, I tell you that this I cannot do. This I cannot do. There is a triangle, Sirius, Scorpio, Mars. And it applies to what's going to be said here. And I'm sure you'll see why. The hierarchy is very different from this. Pacifism, as interpreted by you, has no place in its ranks. The destruction of form in battle, which causes so much fear to many of you, is of small importance to those who know that reincarnation is a basic law of nature and that there is no death. This is such an assertive and reassuring statement, is it not? And calls us, summons us, wouldn't you say, to a more courageous attitude. Do we need that courageous attitude now? Subjectively, we do. Even if not in all places on the outer plane, there are those forces which are, as DK tells us, warring militantly against the disciple. And if we've experienced anything of that, we know that courage is needed. The forces of death are abroad today. So, you can understand that the lords of liberation issue forth. Let them bring succor to the sons of men. In other words, the new and forthcoming 1940 stanza of the Great Invocation, at least released in 1940, much older than that, of course. The forces of death are abroad today, and it is the death of liberty, the death of free speech, the death of freedom in human action, the death of truth and of the higher spiritual values. We can see already the threat. Those who are the agents of this would disagree and say, no such thing is intended by us, just the excellence of our nation as first among all nations. But, this kind of egotism, national egotism that we call nationalism, it does lead to the death of these vitally important factors in the human consciousness and scope of action. The forces of death are abroad today. But it is, more than the death of the form, right? These are the fundamental things. The death of liberty, the death of free speech. We see that going on in many nations today. The death of freedom in human action. So that is imprisonment and a system of laws which prevents people from acting according to their highest desires and their will to act. The death of truth, how much we see this operative today. So there is an erosion of our highest values, the death of truth and of the higher spiritual values. And where some of these values are eroded, it becomes easier to erode others until a scene is set in which humanity becomes enslaved, as the forces of darkness would seek to do. These are the vital factors in the life of humanity. The death of the physical form is a negligible factor in relation to these, and one easily righted again through the process of rebirth and fresh opportunity. Now, we either live in the faith, the belief, the conviction that what he's saying here is true and correct, or we don't. And as disciples in the world, we have to set an example for others. So when we're looking at what is real death, it is of liberty, of speech, of freedom, of truth, of spiritual values, and not the death of the form, which he says is easily righted again. So is that our attitude? In this book, because it's such a practical book, we are led to question ourselves constantly. I would say to those who preach a passive attitude in the face of evil and human suffering, and who endorse a pacifism which involves no risks, these voices, they will always rise, because unbeknownst to themselves, fear is one of the major motivating factors, and especially a fear of the loss on the physical plane of comfort, money, and finally one's life. So he's going to address the pacifists who were slowing down, in a way, the whole process of overcoming the forces of evil, against whom the hierarchy was struggling mightily. So he asks the question, with what do you propose to fight the forces of aggression, of treachery, evil, and destruction, which are today stalking over our planet? This kind of apparition, a monstrous apparition that he seems to be evoking here. What weapons do you bring to the combat? How will you begin to stem the onslaught and arrest the whirlwind? Will you use prayers for peace and then patiently wait for the forces of good to fight your battle and for God to do the work? I tell you that your prayers and your wishes are unavailing when divorced from right and potent actions. Your prayers and petitions may reach the throne of God, symbolically speaking, but then the reply comes forth. The forces of light will strengthen your arms and turn the tide in your favor, if you stand up and fight for that which you desire. Who will arrest the progress of aggressive selfishness if the men and women of goodwill rest back upon their idealism and do naught that is practical to justify their hope or aid in the materialization of their desired ideal? Well, it's such straight talk, isn't it? And so refreshing, and so even needed today, because when danger begins to appear, danger to the body and to the comfort of people, money and comfort are there, demanding to be fulfilled. So when those things are threatened, and injury and even the loss of the outer form, many will pull back, but rather than see themselves as a coward, they will substitute some form of idealism, pacifism, which justifies their retreat. So let us see. I mean, we do see it in the halls of government now. There's always a reason not to stand on high principle. Always a reason is offered and substituted for real action, appropriate action, whichever carries its risk. Excuse me. There are those in the world today who, despite past national selfishness and wrong, are fearlessly and with true insight fighting humanity's battle, and with them the hierarchy stands as it has ever stood, on the side of liberty, right understanding, and correct attitudes in human affairs. Well, you just have to know, how was it that a nation like Great Britain managed to withstand this incredible onslaught? Sometimes they talk about the miracle of Dunkirk, where the entire British expeditionary force, really a huge proportion of Britain's army, was trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk and would have been wiped out. Some, in fact, were sacrificed. But then the people responded. And was it cloud cover that prevented the bombing of those ships which carried a rescue to the people who otherwise would have died, and to those soldiers who had to fight Britain's battles? No question that the hierarchy stood with the stiffening of the resistance of Britain, and with all those who fought even once their country had been occupied. The resistance. Hierarchy stands with them. Now, some may think that this discussion simply refers to a time of war. But I want to say that we are in a war now, even though it has not precipitated yet in a global sense upon the outer plane. And if it should precipitate, the result would be terrible for humanity's survival. So we have much to do to make sure that the battle goes on and that the forces of light prevail in the lower worlds, but that this battle does not become an outer world war. The third phase of the Great War must not precipitate into hostilities upon the physical plane. Yes, there are hostilities between various groups, and yes, these groups can be tied to the general condition of war, but not yet do we have battles occurring between the greatest of the nations, the United Kingdom, China, India, America, Europe. We don't have that yet. And this is 2019, and 6 years remain before the energies of the great conclave, once decided upon, are released into the world, into the lower planes. I would say to those who cry, peace, peace, when there is no peace, are you going to profit by the death and sacrifice, by their death and sacrifice, when the ultimate triumph of the forces of light come to pass? Are you going to take the position that you can then live in a safe world because others gave their lives that you might do so? Are you going to issue forth from the safe security of your pacifist alibi and gratefully acknowledge what they have done and grasp your share of the gains which they have purchased at such a cost? Oof. Well, let's just say another inferred indictment. I mean, no honorable person could say yes to any of these questions. So I would say to those who cry, peace, peace, when there is no peace, are you going to profit by their death and sacrifice when the ultimate triumph of the forces of light comes to pass? Are you going to take the position that you can then live in a safe world because others gave their lives that you might do so? Are you going to issue forth from the safe security of your, he doesn't even call it an ideal, he calls it an alibi, from your pacifist alibi and gratefully acknowledge what they have done and grasp your share of the gains which they have purchased at such great cost? I would warn you not to be glamored by the false premise that you must stand by your hard-earned convictions even at the expense of other people's lives and the downfall of nations, forgetting that fear and false pride will make this argument of importance to you. Are the peace-minded people of the world going to reap the benefits of a peace for which they have paid no price? It is the people who value peace above all else who are today seeking by every possible method to stop Germany, the true supporters, lovers of peace. So obviously he sets out here questions which, as I said, no honorable person can answer yes, I'm going to do that. No, we could not answer yes. We'd have to say, no, I will not have any part in such a cowardly attitude. Yeah, I will not. And today in some halls of government where lesser values are supported so that power, financial power, political power, etc., can be maintained, the same kind of questions can be asked. Because again, we are fighting for human freedom, for free speech, and for the higher spiritual values. These are important readings, and we see how DK is working against the innate cowardice of so many. I don't see that many films, but I love the films, and especially good ones. And there was a kind of a redemptive subplot going on in this film called Saving Private Ryan. It had Tom Hanks in it, and maybe some other well-known actors. And it was about the D-Day invasion and how three of a woman's four sons had been wiped out, had been killed in Europe, in the European theater of war, and how it was decided out of compassion that her fourth son just had to be pulled out of it and saved, so that the loss was not total. Well, we saw heroism and cowardice. There was a man who was assigned as kind of a writer, and he was obviously not well suited to the battlefield, and he was very afraid. And in one instance, one of the very noble soldiers was killed by a German counterpart in a rather excruciating way. And all that this cowardly man could do is cower on the stairway where this murder was occurring. He was frozen. He couldn't move. He just was like whimpering on the stairway. And the German who had killed his friend started coming down the stairway and was so filled with contempt for this cowardly person that he didn't even bother to stop and kill him, fight him, whatever. He just walked by him in complete disgust because the man had refused to fight. Later, the man redeemed himself, and it was a moment in the film where finally he had overcome his cowardice and ventured then to do the right thing. And I guess we've all had our cowardly moments in various lives. So now is a time as well when to fight to preserve the inner spiritual values, we have to give up many of our glamours and illusions and, false ideals and fear-induced positions which we will not admit to ourselves. Well, I may have to call this, let's just say this is the end of 1 hour, and I'm not sure, I may have to call it here, possibly. I will see what the afternoon brings, and if I do, I'll send it to you, and if not, I'll be able to go on. So, let's think about the battle that we are in. Remember that the fourth ray is a warring ray leading to peace, and that Scorpio, which rules the Buddhic plane, whereon the human monads have the greatest expression of a spiritual kind, that sign is the sign of the warrior, and that every true harmony is going to be achieved, at least at this time, through the courage to battle. As Master DK had said at one point when assessing the conditions of the war and his disciples, he just said, see that you battle, he said. Okay, I'll be back. Okay, I think we can go on a little more here, maybe another half hour or an hour if I'm fortunate. It is the people who value peace above all else who are today seeking by every possible means to stop Germany. The hardline rays do exist. The deep subjective life may be found along the softline rays, and especially on the second ray, but the second ray can, at a certain stage of its unfoldment, produce pacifism and weakness and a shrinking back, and the tendency to let others act. I guess we all have to pass through this basic discrimination before we can be members of the hierarchy, a discrimination which says that the ideal state is one of great beauty and dynamic understanding and does not involve the frictional states of Mars, but that in order to get there, we human beings, being the fourth grade of hierarchy and the fourth kingdom, have to engage in the process of conflict, and it is the price that we pay. We get to, through conflict, we do get to know the nature of the opponent, and the opponent understands our nature, and their greater sensitivity is produced. And you've always heard, I know, of great opponents who become great friends. I was interested to see the relationship between John Adams, second president of the United States, and Thomas Jefferson, third president. They hammered out so much of the foundational work upon which the nation was based, its laws, its independence declared, its constitution presented and established, and then they fell out. They fell out through a disagreement. I cannot name what it was, but they were not at all on friendly terms. But towards the end of their lives, the soul began to prevail, and they began to write to each other again, and they both died on the same day, a great symbol, Independence Day, July 4th of 1826. Both of these fathers of the country, there were others, of course, George Washington and so forth, but these fathers of the country died on the same day, and it was the Independence Day, the day when the Declaration of Independence was signed. And by that time, they had reestablished their friendship. The state of the soul is one of great harmony and mutual assistance. But to get there, the powers of Mars have very often to be exercised. We have to earn the harmony into which we finally enter. And we have to see that harmony through conflict is a legitimate approach, and that eventually harmony, beauty, and art will prevail once the conflict subsides. He says here, let me tell you something about the peace for which the hierarchy works and which the spiritually minded people of the world envision even whilst they fight, and for which they are ready to pay the ultimate price. You know, greater love hath no man than that he lay down his life for a friend, as it is said, as Christ has said. Peace, when it comes, will be the result of right world conditions and right human relationships. It is an effect and not a cause. That seems so obvious, doesn't it? It is the effect of certain subjective attitudes which are not yet present in the world on a sufficiently wide scale. It really has so much to do with psychological maturity, actually. Against these emerging conditions, Germany has assembled her potent war machine, fourth ray soul, Germany. First ray, with its power to seize what it wants and to run over the opposition. This was the result with its Aries soul, or rather the result was the blitzkrieg, the lightning-like war, Aries soul, and the great karmic cost coming to the personality in Pisces. Against these emerging conditions of right human relationships, which generate the peace, Germany has assembled her potent war machine and done so surreptitiously, building against the Versailles Treaty, rearming itself in a manner that nobody noticed, or if there was note taken, it was not believed. After years of scientific and planned preparation, I think Germany, to a great extent, has the fifth ray mind, fourth ray soul, first ray personality, fifth ray mind. Today, the Allies stand waiting the opportunity for the final struggle with that potent nation, prepared to institute afterwards those conditions which will guarantee peace, not what the Versailles Treaty offered. The Marshall Plan came in. I think General Marshall had a lot of the second ray and was very foresightful. And as I've said, the threat of then Soviet communism was a great motivating factor in planning how to deal with Germany after the war. But this is 1940, okay? There is no peace on the planet anywhere today, he says. And this is even after the Christ made some kind of contact with the spirit of peace long, long ago. There is no peace in the questioning hearts of those who are not actively sharing in the struggle against evil. There is no peace in any field of human endeavor. It is not to be found in the economic field, torn as it is by the conflict between labor and capital and between great schools of economic thought. It is not to be found in the religious field, where the struggle is going on between authority tainted with old world churchianity and experimental religion. How much the Catholic Church did experiment when John the 23rd became the Pope. Another film, if I may. Shoes of the Fisherman, was it so? And Anthony Quinn was the actor who played the part of John the 23rd. It is not to be found in the social order where class is ranged against class, poor against rich, the man against his brother, and man against his brother. It is certainly not in the political field where party strife controls and binds and blinds the warring groups, hiding the wider vision of world affairs and the needs of humanity as a whole. There is no peace, there is no peace. And DK details this in relation to various fields of human endeavor. Peace is not what we think it is. Otherwise, there would not be such things as peace universities, where for years people study the conditions which bring about peace. There is no peace, and peace will not come through an applied and fanatical pacifism or through the loud talking and wishful thinking of those who hate war and who at the same time swell the tide of conquest and delay true victory by their violently uttered opposing views. We, as psychologists, understanding something about esoteric psychology, we can see how often that fear and irresponsibility are behind the kind of pacifism about which he spoke here. I tell you that all nations hate and oppose war. Even Germany, behind the imposed terror, shrinks in horror at what is being done. And later, of course, the karma came home dreadfully. And yet the atomic bomb was not dropped. Perhaps I don't know, maybe the Japanese seemed sufficiently other and were demonized in certain ways that allowed fewer scruples in dropping that terrible weapon, which DK did say it shattered the Maya and probably was a tremendously redemptive act with respect to the future of Japan, as horrible as it was. Nobody wants to be involved in this. Nobody. War is hell, we've been told, and I'm sure that those who are attacked and who cannot defend against opposing armies will agree that war is hell. And those who are on the attack, it comes back later to them. The same love of peace which inspires the ordinary pacifist inspires those who are today fighting in order that peace may be the result of their sacrifice and the effect of the establishing of those right conditions which Germany is set to prevent. So, it's not just on the basis of the love of peace that one can evade one's responsibilities in the more unpleasant acts of carrying forth resistance against the aggressor and even counterattack. Yes, England, after a short time, counterattacked, and the first stages of the karma came home to the German cities who, I suppose, having been on the winning side of the blitzkrieg for several years, a few years anyway, began to notice, wait, this is coming home to us, and our cities are now being bombed. So this does concentrate the mind and make it question. Yet many neutrally minded and pacifist people are unwilling to pay any price for what they profess so much to cherish. And this is the crux of it all. It is a selfish attitude. It's an ungenerous attitude. I suppose we've all been there, but we learn that at least on our planet, the peace has to be bought, has to be purchased. So frequently in occultism, the question is asked, are you willing to pay the price? And maybe we gloss over that question because we don't imagine how, with the road winding uphill all the way, there will be moments of payment along the way. And in treading the thorny path of occultism, there will be pain, and payment will have to be rendered. A complete refusal to fight on the part of the Allies and of those who are seeing with clarity the issues at stake would open the door to the world domination of the forces of materialism and aggression. If this were the case, Selfishness, for any of us, it masquerades, it hides itself behind fair-sounding words and ideals. And we can fool ourselves and perhaps fool others, but if we closely examine our motives, which every student of occultism must do, we will discover the real reason why we do not want to sacrifice. Now, the very first law of the soul is the law of sacrifice, and the neutral nations and people who are neutral along the way when it comes to treading the path, they are preserving some less than spiritual values, and they do not want to sacrifice. Yet the petals of the egoic lotus, 5 of them, are sacrifice petals. There's one in the knowledge tier, there's one in the love tier, and all 3 in the tier of will or mind, mental vehicle, associated with the mental vehicle. They are petals of sacrifice. And the thing that comes to us, always comes to me anyway, I think of Master Moria's words, when have you ever become less through sacrifice? So it is, one ponders one's life and tries to see, is this so? I pondered my life and I find it is so. I've never become less through sacrifice. I could have sacrificed more. But I've never, when sacrifice was demanded of me, I've never become less because of it. It is upon this that these evil forces count when they face the greatest neutral of all, early on, the United States, and for which they are preparing as they disseminate their lying propaganda and plant their agents in every country and every state, preparatory to a peaceful conquest of a people who refuse sufficiently to value the spiritual issues at stake or take positive action. Now, the greatest neutral of all. Sometimes, when we look back on World War II, we see how the United States fought, and indeed it did, at a certain point, when there was just no other way to deal with what Roosevelt called a day which will live in infamy. The Japanese counselor or member of the consulate was there suing for peace at the very time that Pearl Harbor was attacked, and probably he was betrayed in a certain way. It might not have been possible if he had known exactly what was going to be happening, and if he did, so much the worse. So Roosevelt, the story is, that he knew that Pearl Harbor attack was coming, but let it come because he knew that that particular sacrifice was the only way to bring the United States into the war. The greatest neutral of all, the United States. And one, the isolationist tendency is always there. Maybe it's less possible these days because of the incredible communication system that we have. But here it is. And still these tendencies exist. And when people who have never defended the nation begin to withdraw troops because they don't wish to participate in an economic sacrifice, and something about war makes them, in a hidden way, feel uncomfortable, we're not being led by the best. I was thinking about how Eisenhower, in the 1950s became the president, and he had proved himself. A very interesting horoscope. He was a Libran with Aries rising and Mars in Capricorn on the 10th house cusp. So as a commander of the Allied forces, he was well suited. But nobody could doubt him because of what he had done. He was not a frightened man. And there were others, of course. So there was the possibility that the population of the United States could have been placated, and many allies of Germany, unexpressed of course, were working for that placation. Well, that was turned around, thank goodness. And we, the teachers on the inner side, who for aeons have aided in the preparation of humanity for the coming age of peaceful cooperation and brotherhood, see all this future hope imperiled. Now, DK is not necessarily talking about himself, but many other members of the hierarchy for thousands of years working towards that Venus in Libra state of peaceful cooperation and brotherhood. And because of a lack of courage, the entire possibility imperiled. Aggression and the rape of peaceful nations go steadily forward as nation after nation crumbles under the iron heel of Germany, even as China did under the heel of Japan, grinding the peoples of the world and sweeping them into slavery on a scale of serfdom and cruelty that the world has never seen before. Nation after nation crumbles under the iron heel of Germany and creates a condition of slavery on a scope never seen before. This is the negative use of Pluto, which basically, as a planet of will, robs the individual and the other nations of the expression of their will and locks them up, so to speak. Pisces, the sign of imprisonment, ruled by Pluto, possibly a negative use of that. And there were many mass murderers with the strong Pisces in its relation to Pluto. Well, adjudicators between the pairs of opposites. Free will does exist, and human beings throughout the ages have had the opportunity to exercise, for good or for ill, that free will. As those who sought to arrest German progress succumb to treachery and pain and desert their comrades, the machine of evil marches on. It's not a pretty picture here. And it was truly terrible, the possibilities which might have emerged. Some of us were probably children in those days, or maybe weren't even born yet. As those who sought to arrest German progress succumb to treachery and pain and desert their comrades, the machine of evil marches on. Neutral nations resting back upon their peaceful intent and the claims of civilization. I mean, we're guardians of civilization. No, we must preserve the peaceful values of a true civilization. Resting back upon their peaceful intent and the claims of civilization are absorbed by the forces which impose the German demand for living space, and are thus denuded of liberty of territory and of all economic resources. Well, this shows that by cowardice and also by suffering, some people reacted incorrectly. Some nations reacted incorrectly and allowed their resources to be stripped away, their territory to be taken, their liberty to be abolished. And at the same time, the greatest and most powerful neutral nation in the world arms for defense of its territorial rights, but refuses to arm for the defense of human liberty. This is, again, in this book, we are seeing DK offer indictments of the nations. We are seeing this. Okay. I have to get that. And of course, he does mean the United States, which wants to defend itself, but will not venture forth, at that time at least, to defend human liberty in Europe and in the Far East theater of war. Now, all of that changed, all of that turned around, and the United States became one of the chief combatants. Now, DK said in this work, in these pages, he would be very straight. Am I supposed to just offer you pleasant platitudes that make you feel at peace in your astral body? He says, I cannot do it. And we too have to notice the two ways that things are trending today. Once the foot of selfishness is in the door, keeping it ajar, the whole army can enter in. I saw or realized that the Trojan horse may only have contained under 20 Greek warriors, but then they opened the gates to the city of Troy, and the entire army of the Greeks could march in and destroy Troy. So it only takes a little bit to a few to be allowed in to open the door to the many destroyers. Do I speak too strongly to those of you who are not participating in this planetary war? Because certainly DK had many students in the United States, and the United States was not yet a declared combatant. I speak with clarity because I seek to arouse you to the true issues whilst there is yet time. I seek to arrest in you the idea excuse me, that the Western Hemisphere is the seat of civilization, the custodian of the best that there is in humanity, and that the spiritual future of humanity lies in the cherished land of liberty. It is particularly one of the gifts of the United States. Excuse me. The laws of liberation, and one of them particularly connected with freedom. Liberty is a thing of the human soul and is found throughout the entire human race. Civilization is a universal human right and not the prerogative of one nation. I tell you that humanity is everywhere spiritually minded, and that the new race, the coming civilization, the new age culture will be found throughout the world. The universal inheritance of the human race. So, okay, DK is being very stern here. While there is yet time. Okay. Well, we'll learn more. There was time. There was time. And that time was seized. And we're here doing what we're doing now because of that seizure of time and opportunity. But there was pride. And he's telling the United States that certainly it's not the seat of civilization, and that everywhere the human race will benefit from the new age, energies, and the new civilization, and it will be a universal condition on the planet. But everywhere humanity is the victim of propaganda, and of course we're seeing it even now. You would think that this question of propaganda, it would be solved. You would think that. But it was not. Not in our time. No, it was not solved. And today as well, in the United States, as a citizen, I can see the overcoming of weak minds in emotionally polarized people by the untruthful propaganda. But everywhere, he says, humanity is the victim of propaganda, a propaganda which can only be seen in its true light when men think in terms of human liberty, when they together take the needed steps to ensure human happiness and learn in so doing to face conditions as they are, not hiding their heads in a dream world of their own making. So this is the attempt to arouse people, right? This is the attempt to arouse people to realization and to more courageous action. And I keep on thinking about the balance point at which we find ourselves today between the form and the soul. And which direction will we, humanity, take? That is a really big issue. The world of the future of which men in all lands dream is more than a possibility if men will shoulder their just responsibilities and together make it a fact in human experience. Are there among us enough presently who see the danger, who see that door held ajar by the boot of evil, even today? But such a world will not be possible for many long years if Europe goes down in a crash of battle and under the impact of the German war machine. It will emerge into realization when there are enough people in the world who think clearly, see the vision truly, act intelligently, and meet force with force, which is the only method which the forces of aggression can understand. Well, We're looking at history here. Europe did not go down in a crash, and the kind of United States of Europe was founded. The European Union came to birth, and freedom began to emerge, and the borders were no longer considered to be prohibitive, though again there is danger that they might again be considered so. The fight that's going on in the United Kingdom regarding this backstop between Northern Ireland, which is a member of the United Kingdom, and the remainder of Ireland, the Irish Republic, which is a member of the EU, that is front and center today. And to preserve the flow of people, of goods, of services, of energies between these two is one of the symbolic events of the day. How will it work out? Today, the forces of evil have swept over France, Belgium, Holland, Norway, Poland, Finland, and Romania. Interesting about Finland because, it is sometimes said that Finland cooperated with Germany during the war. The leader of the Finnish military, Gustav Mannerheim, he detested Hitler, but saw that Russia was determined to overcome Finland and annex it, even as Germany had annexed Austria and incorporated Czechoslovakia and so forth, and, subdued Poland. And the only place, because of Sweden's neutrality, where Finland could get arms to defend itself against Stalin's intentions was through Germany. Well, that's a long story. And later, of course, Finland was instrumental in throwing the Germans out toward the latter days of the war, again under Russia's prompting. Anyway, all of these countries had been occupied or very strongly influenced. All of these, here I think Finland was not occupied, but it was cooperative, and so maybe no occupation was needed. Anyway, these forces of evil, through the armies of the countries which responded to these powerful, selfish occult forces, these forces of evil had swept over these nations. Nothing has arrested their progress, he says, neither truth, nor armed might, nor sacrifice, nothing. So, that's how it looks oftentimes when Aries is the ruler. It looks unstoppable. But there was a stop. And we might say that the Russian winter played a great role in that stoppage. It stopped Napoleon, it stopped Hitler. Today, Great Britain stands with a handful of her allies upholding the banner of human liberty. With her stands France, for France is still loyal in her thousands to truth and liberty. Poland, Holland, Norway, and Belgium, all represented in that small fortress of the forces of light, which is the British Isles. And so the resistance was firm and strong. It was very strong in France, and I think in Norway too. Yes, I don't know enough about Holland and Belgium, but I'm sure, there was a great resistance against the occupation or against governments that were so friendly to the Nazis that they might as well have been Nazis themselves. Behind stand their great empires, with their resources as yet untouched. So there were empires of France, of Holland, the Dutch empires, of Belgium, yes. Maybe not so much Norway or Poland, but certainly the British Empire was huge at the time. Behind stand their great empires with their resources as yet untouched, certainly on Hitler's mind to exploit, of course. Behind them again stand the spiritually minded peoples in every nation, and behind them all stands the hierarchy of light. In this interlude prior to the final struggle, I write to those who are looking on with sympathy but without sacrifice, and I ask you, where do you stand? Looking on with sympathy, but not with sacrifice. Now that's a key idea, isn't it? I think in Agni Yoga it says at some point, look, pity is a puddle. Unless, you accompany it with the action that will relieve the situation which you pity. So I write for those who are looking on with sympathy, but without sacrifice. And such numbers exist today, as we see democracy and human rights violated for the sake of selfishness, reputation, egotism, financial gain. We see this. Where do you stand, he says. I bring to you some of the contrasts in this war in all simplicity and in an effort to enable you to choose right action. Let's see. It's going to be longer than I can do if I make it to 2 hours. Yes, it's longer. And normally I would try to make it a 5-hour program, but cannot do that right now. So here are contrasts. And he's really trying to clarify people's minds among the aspirants and disciples, knowing that this material will reach many others through their agency. The first great contrast might be called the way of appeasement and the way of aggression. Immediately when you say the word appeasement, the English Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain comes to mind. We will have peace in our time. Herr Hitler has assured me of this, and so forth. Of course, in some future life, all these mistakes will have to be corrected. The method of peaceful discussion was tried by the peace-loving peoples of France and Great Britain, and the way of aggression developed for many years, is the way of Germany, of Russia, and in a lesser degree of Italy. Italy never became, the really formidable foe. There's something in the nature of Italy that just will now allow that to happen. It cannot become another Rome, even though some of its deluded leaders would see Italy reclaim the Roman banner. So yes, there was peaceful discussion, and the way of aggression developed for many years and is the way of Germany, Russia, and in a lesser degree of Italy. I would remind you that it is to the eternal credit of the Allies, even though it lacked worldly common sense, that their preparations for war proved inadequate to the face of German preparedness. Well, the Allies were not of the warlike nations, and war was simply a last resort. They were not one-pointed in their war effort, for the higher values of world civilization engrossed them, and the activities of their empires which live at peace within themselves. They have made many grievous errors in the past, as have all peoples, but the way of expiation and of sacrifice is theirs, willingly accepted, and their reward is the freedom of humanity. So they did not fall into the trap of becoming aggressor nations. It was not in their nature to do so. So I'm going to, make these contrasts rather large. Another contrast growing out of the above. And, I'll enlarge its size. Growing out of the above. This is the emphasis upon a new world order within a rapidly changing world. The Allies uphold one point of view and the Germans another. It is for this new and better world and the bringing in of the conditions wherein peace can be possible and the new world order developed that today the men of vision fight and die. Okay, a new world order, and not the totalitarian order to be imposed should Germany have won the war. It is for this new and better world and the bringing in of the conditions wherein peace can be possible that the New World Order developed, that today the men of vision fight and die. The contrast is the enforced world order, emphasized by the so-called German super race, which will centralize the world around Germany, for the aggrandizement of Germany, for the expression of the German living space, expansion of the German living space, and the supply of Germany's economic need. It's an order that would have been, and at this time he says it will be, if it happens, reinforced by terror, by cruelty, by death, ignoring the needs of humanity as a whole and the rights of all other nations, and sacrificing the whole world, if need be, to the glory of Germany. Okay. So let's make this number 2 and increase this size a bit. Another contrast. Okay, well, rampant selfishness, with all peoples exploited as slaves and all natural resources brought for German consumption and use as they would have those resources used. Okay. With this German enforced rule and order, her greed for territorial expansion, and her ruthless acquisition of goods and possession of other nations, I would ask you to contrast the expressed aim of the Allies, reiterated again and again in the speeches of the statesmen of both France and Great Britain, and summed up in the words of a great Englishman, a government official, and an aspirant to right and truth. Okay. Certainly this war, as did the war in Atlantis make possible the moving forward on the path of initiation of many who would not be treading it even today. And of course, that's really shocking when you think of when the war in Atlantis took place millions of years ago. Okay, we shall use all our influence when the time comes in the building of a new world in which nations will not permit insane armed rivalry to deny their hopes of fuller life and future confidence, nor be forever overborne by grim foreboding of disaster. The new world that we seek will enlist the cooperation of all peoples on a basis of human equality, self-respect, and mutual tolerance. We shall have to think out many things that lie on the root of international contacts, social, political, and economic, and find means of reconciling the necessity of change in a constantly changing world with security against the disturbance of the general peace through resort to violence, and find means of reconciling the necessity of change in a constantly changing world with security against the disturbance of the general peace through resort to violence. To this order that we shall create, all nations have their contribution to make, and a great responsibility both in thought and action will rest upon our people. We, no less than others, have our lesson to learn from past failures and disappointments. So this is an aspirant, but we don't know what that term really means. It can mean actually one who is almost an initiate. We're all aspirants in a way. So probably we could track down who said this. A government official and an aspirant to right and truth. Okay, a little more. I would have you note the recognition by this spokesman for the Allies of the need of change, the realization of the coming world order, and the humble statement anent past mistakes. I would call your attention very briefly also to the contrast in the methods employed. Cruelty versus kindness, merciless bombing and machine gunning on the one side, and the constant refraining from attack upon the enemy by the Allies for fear of killing the defenseless. At least that did go on for a while, until nothing more could be done. I would call your attention to the broadcast from Great Britain warning the Germans to take cover when they hear the British planes over Germany. Amazing. I would call your attention to the reticent but truthful propaganda which lays no emphasis upon that which could stir up hate, and the lying information from Berlin and conquered cities. It is not my purpose to do more than indicate these contrasts and which grow out of a widely differing subjective attitude to humanity. Well, the soul of Great Britain, it is the second-rate soul. It is, however, of value for us all to face them in the process of clarifying issues. The basic contrast between freedom of speech, thought, and action, which distinguishes democracies, and the cruel suppression of all liberty of thought and personal activity which controls the masses in Germany today, is too well known to require emphasizing by me. So let's just kind of get that, capture that. Okay, let's see if I have this funny feeling that I may have done something here that was not appropriate. Okay. But I bring these contrasts to your attention, asking you to recognize your responsibility to stand behind those who fight for liberty and to end the activity of those who are the enemies of all human freedom. Whereas Pluto can bring about much destruction which brings release, it can also enforce slavery. As we learn from I think the Devil card, is it a Capricorn card in the Tarot? The chains are there. All right, friends. Now I've taken maybe a little more time than I actually have, but we are on page, what page are we on? 239. So we've gone from 229 to 239 in this particular program, which I think is program 21. And what I'll do is make this as clear as possible and hope again to bring forward commentary on this book written about circumstances which occurred for us, it seems, relatively long ago, but which have immediate application in our perhaps deteriorating situation, deteriorating as far as the health of world democracies is concerned. Let us see whether we've learned enough to stand on principle and fight off those who wish to deny of hierarchy, from hierarchy and humanity, that which has long been envisioned as the proper goal and release into greater usefulness and joy and happiness of humanity, the release of humanity, long foreseen. As DK said, that was imperiled. And our question is today, if we don't take action internally as we can and externally as we can, is that same vision imperiled? More so, less so? Certainly the weapons of mass destruction did not exist except towards the very end of the war, and now so many who shouldn't have them do have them. So that will be it for right now, and we will go on at some point here as I can. So thank you, and I'll be back with you shortly.